So I guess since it's 2 o'clock, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. I think this is going to be a helpful hour of the day. Hopefully get lots of answers from the folks at KLC about these funds. I know there have been lots of questions, so I think JD and his team is going to just give kind of a brief overview of the program and then answer questions. Are you all good with questions in the chat and just people asking them at the end?
We are good with whatever anybody wants to do.
Perfect.
I'll introduce the staff and they'll kind of help me watch the chat box and stop me, correct me if I say anything incorrect.
That'll work. Well, welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us. Thank you, KLC, for being willing to help us get these questions answered. And I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you all to get started, if y'all are ready.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mary. And I want to thank Eric and Mary and Emily for reaching out and including us. Hopefully we can continue to work closely. We always have with the Barren River Area Development District, especially since Eric's been at the helm there, has done a great job and is a valuable partner for the for KLC and our city officials around that area development district. I'm JD Cheney. I'm the executive director of League of Cities. I have two experts with me. Morgan Patterson is on here. She's a director of municipal law, and Joseph Coleman, who is their research and federal relations manager. And they know all the answers. They've been the one answering all the legal questions. And Michelle's on here with us too, who helped prepare the PowerPoint and gets other information out to you all. All those emails you've been reading about the legislative all come from Michelle. There's your author of all those stories that come under my name, but she does all the work. So I appreciate them being on here too. So we'll just do the PowerPoint. And as Mary pointed out, you can stop us if you have questions. Joseph and Morgan will be looking at chat, but if you want to unmute and ask a question, we're fine with that too. I'll preface it by saying if you haven't been through any sessions learning about ARPA, it is an evolving rule, evolving standard. As the interim rules being finalized, or the interim rule will be finalized over this comment period. In addition, the FAQs are being added to at least once every couple of weeks so far seems to be the pattern, or every 7 or 8 days. Joseph, I don't know. It gets updated every so often. We expect those to grow as we go along. So what may not be clear right now, you can rest assured with 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country, plus ever how many counties there are across the entire country, with officials grappling with these issues, that those are going to be trickling into the Department of Treasury, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Conference, U.S. Conference of Mayors. All of those entities are going to be weighing in with questions just like you have. And hopefully, as time marches on, we'll get additional clarification on some of these things that look pretty broad right now, where you want to ask, well, can I buy the bulldozer to put in the infrastructure to do a water upgrade? We got all kinds of questions along those lines. I'm going to do the share here and hopefully it works. Did it work? All right, thumbs up. Let me see if I can. Is it not working anymore? Is that just the slides?
It's still working.
All right, good. All right. I had 2 or 3 of them pull up. Today we'll give you a little background, talk about the requirements, talk about what we know from the Department for Local Government. We've been in close contact with them about getting the funding out, what the eligible uses are, which is where we'll spend the bulk of the time, ineligible uses, reporting requirements, and go over all of those things. First of all, just by way of background, and I don't know if anyone's on from Bowling Green. I believe that would be the only entitlement, if I'm correct, Eric. I'm going to watch Eric say, and Mary. The only entitlement community is Bowling Green in the Barren River Area Development District. So Bowling Green's going to have some different rules with regard to accessing the funds, getting the appropriation, and reporting. But the eligible uses are going to be the same, just like for the county government. County governments had a different way, like the entitlement communities, to access the funds directly from Treasury. But the eligible uses, once the money's out, it's going to all be governed under the same rules. So Kentucky had 9 what they call metropolitan cities or entitlement communities. Besides Lexington and Louisville, that included Bowling Green, Owensboro, Covington, Elizabethtown, Henderson, and Hopkinsville were entitlement communities. And like the county governments in Kentucky, they access their funding directly through a portal established by the U.S. Department of Treasury. Most all of our cities, I believe all 9 of these cities, have gone ahead and registered and accessing their funds. And those cities receive them directly from the Department of Treasury. The other 406 or 7 cities in Kentucky are non-entitlement units of local government. That means, yeah, you get the money. It's a direct appropriation to you all as city governments from Congress coming through the Treasury, but they've tasked the state governments with administering the distribution of those funds. So that means we're going to have to, when the state applied for their ARPA funding, they were deemed to have also requested it for all the non-entitlement cities in the Commonwealth as well. They've done that. They got their allocation. The state did, I think, either the day or 2 after Memorial Day. And that set them on a 30-day timeline to distribute then the funds to the non-entitlement communities. So in this instance, DLG, unlike with CARES Act, I want to go ahead and distinguish that. With the CARES Act money, you were making an application for money that you had already spent in terms of a reimbursement. In this instance, this is an appropriation directly to your city based on the ratio of your population to the other non-entitlement cities in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You get the money. You don't have to submit receipts and show reimbursement. And then ultimately, you as a city government are going to be responsible for the reporting and ensuring that you spend the money in accordance with all of these guidelines issued from Treasury. As you all know, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan March 11th. Treasury had 60 days to release the guidance and the allocations. They took every bit of those 60 days. They did it on the very last possible day. On May 10th, they did the final rule, interim final rule, a summary, and had some FAQs. And on that day, all the entitlement cities and the county governments could access their funds from the Treasury. Now, on the 30-day calculation, DLG will make the funds available to you all as early as June 27th of this year for non-entitlement cities. And I'm going to tell you what we did. We requested the governor and the Department for Local Government ask for a 30-day extension. And the reason for that was to keep you all from getting your allocation on June 27, 2021, when there's just 3 days left under your current budget. Instead of having to amend your budgets this year, you could get that money July 6th, July 7th. They don't have to do the whole 30 days. And that way you'll have a longer time to amend your budget you're just adopting or have just adopted already, instead of having to rush to amend your budget this fiscal year. So I think they've agreed to request Treasury to make that extension. So I'm guessing here and talking with them, we're looking at that week of July 5th, July 6th, that funding will be sent to cities that have submitted their budget certification forms and their agreements, as executed agreements back to the Department for Local Government. I would probably at this, I would probably go ahead and put an X through this last bullet point here. At this point, we recommend you not reach out to DLG. Put an X through that. I think DLG, early on when we were doing these presentations, I think DLG is now very much engaged with ensuring that your budget certification form. In fact, they've asked all the area development districts around the state, we've been calling people, hounding them to get their forms in. They're very much engaged now with ensuring that you got the right paperwork. So DLG, you can contact your reps for the Department for Local Government with them. Of course, if you're a smaller city, in order to be able to do this, you need your DUNS number for sure. If you have your SAMS, don't have a SAMS number yet, they're going ahead and they're processing your information. But you're going to need the SAMS registration in order to comply with the reporting requirements that we're going to talk about a little later on. And of course, a bank account that would allow ACH. Now, I think what DLG is going to try to do is to cut paper checks. They got a check writer system. So I don't know that they're going to do ACH transfers. I think they're going to do paper checks. That hadn't been finalized yet, but that's information that you have to have. The first tranche of funding, you're not going to get all your allocation all at once. You've probably seen your estimates. If you haven't, I don't know whether Joseph may want to put up the link to show you what your estimate on your allocation is. DLG has not finalized the official. It won't be off by more than a couple $100, I don't think, in talking with them, if they exclude a couple of cities on what that KLC estimate was. But you're going to get it in two parts. The first tranche probably being that first, second, third week of July. And then the second half of your total allocation, your second tranche, will come no sooner than 12 months following your initial release of the funding. So once this year, once around next July of the following year. If you look at what Kentucky had, it was $1.7 billion. If you look at city and county allocations, just for Kentucky cities and counties. When you break down the city breakdown, the entitlement communities, those 9 larger cities, got $607 million total. That was based on a CDBG formula, which includes average household income and other factors just besides population. That's why some people are having a hard time saying, well, Covington got $34 million, and they see the whole list, and Bowling Green, got 17 or 18. How could Bowling Green's way bigger than Covington. How could Covington get more money? It was based on the CDBG formula, not purely based on population. As I said before, those entitlement communities go directly through Treasury. Non-entitlement communities, $324 million for the 406 or 7 other cities around Kentucky. And the reason I'm playing loose with the numbers, we have some cities that got allocations that have not functioned as cities in the past several years. I don't know whether there's any in the Barren River ad, but there's a couple of cities throughout the state that haven't elected any representatives, and they haven't dissolved formally. They still have a corporate status, and so those were allocated as well. So we'll have to see what happens with those. The non-entitlement cities, your formula is based purely on population, and it's a ratio of your city's 2019 census estimate, I believe. And Joseph, I can't see Joseph's head on here. I need to get where I can see Joseph's head shaking.
Yes, you're right.
All right. Based on the 2019 census, as a ratio of yours population to the the total population of all non-entitlement cities in Kentucky. It's important to note that even though the state and DLG, as the state's agent, is serving as a pass-through entity for this, The state, nor DLG, nor the legislature, state government cannot impose any additional restrictions on the expenditures of these funds. This is going to be solely governed by guidance from the Treasury, from the United States Department of Treasury. Here's a link. I think Joseph or somebody, or Morgan, somebody put it in there, Michelle, on your estimate. If you haven't seen that, we said 2 tranches before. You're going to have to, that budget certification form is a necessary step for the state government. All the state governments are going through this for their cities and towns and villages, because they cannot give a city more than 75% of what its last full budget year that was in effect as of January 27th, 2020. Their fiscal year 2020 budget couldn't be greater than 75% of that. So they got, it's probably about 10 or so cities, maybe a dozen cities in Kentucky, just a handful, that their allocation would have been greater than 75% of their total budget. And so they got to verify that the award that they're giving out doesn't do that. You have the budget certification number that requires, we said before, the DUNS, SAM, EIN, contact information. They're processing, DLG's processing the forms, even if you don't have the SAMS number and you're still waiting for the SAMS number, just to let you know that. And then what DLG did last week, my full understanding, and I'm looking at Eric on this one, my full understanding is if the budget certification form was in, they helped. They went above and beyond here, the staff at DLG, and helped fill out your Title VI compliance and your memorandum of understanding with the Department of Treasury. Mailed those out if you sent your certification form in, and are waiting on those to come back to get you solid for whenever the distribution comes out. So if you have done your budget certification, you will have received 2 documents that have to be executed by a chief executive officer of your city, and get that back to DLG in order to get the award when it becomes available. Anybody else have any more information on that I didn't cover? I think I'm up to date on it. All right. So if you haven't got your budget certification form in, do that so you can get the 2 contracts to get you able to go. All right. So here's what everybody wants to talk about. We got all this money coming. How can we spend the money now that we have all the administrative stuff out of the way? The first one is pretty familiar territory as you were looking at how to spend your CARES money. Of course, again, keep in mind, CARES was reimbursement on a reimbursement basis, but you were able to get reimbursement for these types of things. And this looks most like the CARES funding allocation here in the first pot, or first authorized way to spend the money. Recipients are authorized to use the funding to address any broad range of public health needs dealing with the mitigation of COVID-19. That includes medical expenses, behavioral health care, which includes substance misuse, and public health resources. They can also use it to cover payroll associated with that. And then the medical and behavioral health as well. Now, payroll, I think the next slide shows us that with regard to payroll, it is to cover the payment and benefits for public health, healthcare, human services, public safety. You'll remember this from the CARES Act. Public safety and similar employees are eligible if they spend more than half their time on COVID-19 response. Now, with this one, unlike with CARES, where everybody ran to submit all of their public safety, their police, fire, and EMT expenses to get a reimbursement, this is not the case here. There was a presumption under CARES Act dollars that any public safety expenses were associated with mitigating COVID. That is not the case with ARPA funds. So when you're looking at public safety, looking at payroll expenses, you have to ensure that that the payroll expenses and benefit expenses are actually useful in the mitigation of COVID. If it qualifies, recipients can cover the full payroll and benefits costs for those employees, operating units, or any division that's primarily dedicated to the COVID-19 response. Now, look, most likely you're going to have a very difficult time sitting here on June 14th, 2021, with no more masks and no more as we emerge from the pandemic going forward from March 3rd even, which is where you measure this from, March 3rd, 2021, to say that you have police and fire primarily dedicated to COVID. So this is not going to be as fruitful for you in terms of the way it was during the CARES Act, but there may be some things that qualify. Staff hours, if it does qualify, don't have to be tracked routinely, but a city has to periodically demonstrate that they've assessed and reassessed whether a designated employee truly is dedicated to the mitigation of COVID and the COVID-19 response. Recipients can use funds to cover a portion of the payroll to any time spent on administrative work. Now, this is one that you may want to take note of, especially if you have a larger city and you're going to do any grant for small businesses or anything like this. You can use the funds to cover a portion of payroll and benefit expenses if an employee is spending time on administrative work necessary due to COVID-19 public health emergency and its negative economic impact. And that includes costs related to dispersing payments from these funds, the Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, the LFRF. I've just been calling them ARPA funds. I don't know if that's getting on anybody's nerves or not, but from the ARPA funds, you can use that to pay administrative payroll to disperse those payments out of those funds. Medical and behavioral health, vaccination programs, including reasonable financial incentives to get folks vaccinated, to do contact tracing, to perform duties essential in isolation or quarantine orders, purchase of PPE, any enforcement of any public health order, any public communication effort. If you're encouraging people to get the vaccine, you're doing public relations related to that. Any capital investment, this is one we're starting to get some questions about. Any capital investment in a public facility to meet pandemic operational needs. And I'm sure, Eric, the counties are probably wearing you all out asking about whether this would cover jails or some of the jail retrofitting. I know my wife, who's deputy judge in Madison County with a big jail overcrowding problem, thinks this is her in for jail funding, perhaps to do some public facilities. But retrofitting and looking at public facilities, there hadn't been a ton of guidance. Morgan and Joseph can correct me if I'm wrong related to that one, but I think that's going to be a really popular category under this, a subcategory under this category for expenditure, including ventilation improvements. So looking at fixing ventilation and other issues in existing facilities going forward will probably be one that's frequently used. Any questions on category one? Doesn't look like there's anything is there anything in the chat box? Nope, we're good. Let's keep going. Number 2, addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID. Again, I think I mentioned, I may not have, but I'll mention it again just for clarification. Generally, the use of these funds looks on a forward basis from March 3rd, 2021. Is that right, Joseph? March 3rd, 2021 going forward. There are a couple of exceptions we'll talk about with regard to revenue replacement, with regard to premium pay, especially. But in general, we're looking from March 3rd, 2021 forward through December 31st, 2024. And that was another key point that I think I forgot in the introduction, is that you have until December 31st, 2024 to spend or obligate this funding. If you obligated it prior to December 31st, 2024, you have to December 31st, 2026 to actually spend it. So we've got a much longer window so you can kind of shake off your preconceived notions about how we dealt with CARES Act, where we were calling you and saying, get your reimbursement in, hurry up, the deadline's coming. This one you can slow down, you can be much more deliberative in the process, which is another reason we didn't care to ask for that extension, to keep you from having to pay the newspaper for another publication of this of amending this current fiscal year's budget ordinance, because you have so long, and not only because you have that window, but because we know this guidance that we're talking about today and the FAQs and all these limitations are going to evolve with time. And you're going to want to reserve some of this to deal with the revenue replacement stuff. So there's not a panic here. There's not a rush. You're not going to lose your money, but I will urge you to get your budget certification form in, get those agreements put in. If you're non-responsive after 60 days, then the state can gather the money and redistribute it to those cities that have responded. So that's really the only deadline you have, not in spending it, but in getting your information in to say you want the money for your community. So back to this category number 2, sorry about the detour, addressing the negative economic impacts, aid to unemployed workers and job training, assistance to households facing food, housing, or other financial insecurity, funding to small businesses through loans, grants, in-kind assistance, and counseling programs. And that's small businesses and includes nonprofits as well. Aid to tourism, travel, hospitality, and similarly impacted sectors. You know, if you look at the guidance, if you hadn't looked at those 150 plus pages, you'll see that they took a long time to talk about how negatively the tourism and restaurant hospitality industry was impacted due to COVID. And so there's a focus on that. Rehiring public sector staff to pre-pandemic levels. You know, if you're a city government, you had to lay people off, do your revenue shortfalls, you can rebuild your internal staff to operational capacity so that you'll be at full tilt to implement any of these economic relief programs that are coming through ARPA. Planned expansion or upgrade of any pandemic delayed tourism, travel, or hospitality facilities. So this one will probably be another popular area where we get a lot of discussion. If you had planned to do something in those fields, tourism, travel, convention centers, hospitality, you could spend this money to do that if it got delayed because of the pandemic, and doing public jobs programs. Now, we had a lot of questions related to assistance to households. Household assistance includes food assistance for your citizens and your households for rent, mortgage, utility payments, counseling and legal aid, cash assistance. So here the question comes up, well, we can do our own local stimulus payments. And the answer is yes. It envisions that you have the capability to do local stimulus payments. But now if you're doing direct cash transfers, this last arrow at the bottom of this, if you're doing direct cash transfers, even though they're permitted, they have to be, and you have to be able to demonstrate in the reporting how those payments are proportional to the negative economic impacts on households. So that's one thing we're waiting on as well. Additional guidance from the Treasury about what these reporting forms look like. How detailed are you going to have to be? Are they going to be more specific? So it does say you have to show how it's proportional. Now, it creates an assumption that the stimulus checks from the federal government was proportional to the economic impact, and how you take that and calculate that for local stimulus, I'm not certain. I think we got to get some more meat on those bones on that guidance. But if you need to help with burials, home repairs, weatherization, other needs that are incurred by households, those are all permitted. It also addresses this internet access and digital literacy assistance issues to assist households, which became more of a need to be connected than we've ever seen. And job training is also one in that category. Small business and nonprofits, that assistance can include loans or grants to mitigate their financial hardship they experience as a result of COVID. Loans or grants or in-kind assistance to implement COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics. Again, we're coming out of the pandemic. Probably not going to be a highly utilized category. Technical assistance, counseling, or other services to assist with business planning needs are authorized under here. And it does take some time to say cities generally can't take this money and use it for overall economic development or workforce development unless the efforts directly can be shown to address a negative economic impact from the COVID-19 public health emergency. So not general workforce development, not general economic development. It has to be intricately related. I mean, not intricately, it has to be directly related to mitigation of the pandemic. Any questions on category 2?
JD, when you talked about the tourism planned expansions and things like that, could you be a little bit more specific? I mean, is that like just a tourism related signage you were going to do for your community, or upgrade a hike and bike trail? Are you talking about things like that?
Says facilities. I'm going to let Joseph and Morgan take that question particularly.
So in reality, I think the way JD has described a lot of this guidance is appropriate. It is it is specifically general in nature. So it says something very narrow, like, tourism facilities that were anticipated or in the process or delayed because of COVID-19. And then it just kind of leaves it open. But I think they are more talking about structures from the guidelines. However, they don't specifically say like a brick and mortar building. And then I can defer to Joseph as well if he has more input on that.
I think you're right, Morgan and JD as well. The rule, as Morgan said, is both very specific and very unspecific about almost everything that's included in it. So it literally would say things like aid to tourism industry. So what does that mean? How is that defined? That could be giving money to your local tourism commission that probably lost revenue from a decline in transient room or restaurant taxes. That could be giving aid to hotels or restaurants or other hospitality industries that lost revenue. JD mentioned providing to small businesses and things like that if they can demonstrate a need. As far as other things, I've gotten questions from cities that say, can we use this for a pump replacement in our swimming pool, that they have that need? And I would generally say probably not, unless you can very definitively prove that is tourism related. But then we've got other cities that may have a water park that attracts hundreds of thousands of people from outside the city, that anything they did in that case probably would be considered tourism related. So unfortunately, we really don't know much. And then Treasury has essentially said in their most recent FAQs that they're not going to pre-approve projects either. So unfortunately, that's pretty much upon all of us to try to figure it out. So the main thing I would say, if there's anything that you can do that might demonstrate that a project or a facility is somehow related to tourism, I think you're probably going to be fine. But I do think you're going to have some sort of data to back you up.
How's that, Bobby?
I think so. We looked at parking area for our hike and bike trail, designated parking area. We applied for several grants, been denied. A signage program, starting around the interchange to promote that. Sounds to me like those would probably fit that designation.
And one of my questions too about that would be, how will they expect you to demonstrate that it was a planned, project that you deferred because of COVID? And so maybe, I don't know if you budgeted for that or something, and you can show it in your fiscal year, 2019 or 2020 budget that maybe you didn't hold off on. I don't know. I'll, put that to the KLC folks, but just how to document that that was a planned expenditure that you didn't do because of COVID is something to think about too.
Yeah, not just say, we were daydreaming about this and then COVID happened. I think Mary's right. You're going to have some documentation. And this is where I think the reporting forms are going to be pretty helpful to see what level of evidence to put more clarity on what level of evidence you're going to have to submit on both components, that it actually is tourism related. It actually was planned. It actually is a facility related to that expansion. And as Joseph said, yeah, they're not going to be in the business of, and they couldn't be in the business. Again, 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country, boroughs, and other forms of city type government, along with all the county governments. They're not going to be able to pre-approve. But what I would suspect you would see, and Joseph, you can disagree with this or not as federal relation managers, is that there'll be consistent questions asked like that. Like Mary's question, how do you prove that it was planned? How do you show that it's tourism related? Questions like that, and then questions of, I had a horse trail, or I had this or that. And those might eventually start creeping in, but I do think, like Mary's question of how do you show it, put some more meat on the bones about what's related to tourism, what's considered a facility. Somebody's going to ask, and perhaps the league through the national, KLC through the National League is going to ask, does facility mean a building with 4 corners on it? Or does that mean the sign? Where this, as this goes along, I think we'll get some additional guidance on. I guess that means Joseph did agree.
I agree. The only thing, and I know you're going to mention this later, JD, in the presentation, but I would just reiterate, think of this not as direct aid as a handout. This is still in effect a grant program. So, you are going to have to do reporting. You are going to have a budget. You are going to have a compelling narrative that, even though I don't think Treasury is going to be going through these with a fine tooth comb with about 19,000 cities and over 3,000 counties, you still want to have your ducks in a row. So I would just reiterate, think of this as a grant program, and make sure you've got things like a budget and a project narrative and things. The more you can think of it like that, I think the better off you're going to be on your reporting.
All right, area 3. Target low-income communities. If you, as I mentioned before, if you did take a chance to read the interim rule, it took quite a bit of word space to discuss how specific communities have been impacted by COVID. So targeting your assistance to low-income communities is something that is authorized under here. Recipients can fund any of the following, these 4 bullet points, within a qualified census tract area, which is a low-income area designated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or to other populations, households, or geographic areas that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Now, if you do this and you determine your own geographic area or your own group of households, again, this goes to Mary's point a little earlier. How do you demonstrate that it was uniquely or disproportionately impacted as compared to the others? Again, the guidance doesn't do a lot. It says we can assume qualified census tract is, but if you're going to step outside of that, how are you going to demonstrate the disproportionate impact? And the guidance doesn't provide a lot of info on that. But if you do that, use a qualified census tract or another population threshold or geographic area disproportionately impacted, you can use that for the employment or payment of community health workers, public benefit navigators for the remediation of lead hazards, community violence and intervention programs, services to address homelessness, which has really heightened in a number of our cities that you wouldn't typically think of having major homelessness issues, affordable housing development, housing vouchers, residential counseling, housing navigation assistance, early learning services, new ones or expanding what exists, resources to high poverty school districts. Now, most cities and counties probably aren't going to do that to the school district, given the fact that school districts got their own separate allocations, but it's authorized here. Tutoring after school programs, services to address social, emotional, or mental health needs in that defined geographic area, that census tract, or whatever you've defined as a disproportionately impacted community. New and expanded childcare, home visiting programs for families with young children, and enhanced services for child welfare involve families and foster youth. We're all under this this category of targeting low-income communities. Any questions about it? Thought I saw something flash there it's on a whole different screen. My chat box is on a whole different screen, so oh, Joseph just put up some helpful info. Good. All right, number 4. Lost public sector revenue. So this is where you're going to want to hold on to some of your money over the course of the time if you want the broadest area for utilization. But you're going to have to do a calculation. That's one of the things when they were doing the CARES Act, most cities and county governments were very vocal with Congress when they were doing the CARES Act and after the CARES Act, that if you do another local government aid, it needs to be directly to local governments where the state can't interfere with it. And it needs to be able to allow us to replace lost revenue because of the economic impacts. Well, they listened, but now we have some restraints on it. Now, yes, if you can show that you've lost revenue, then you're able to recapture a portion of those funds and spend it on any public facing direct government service without any limitation. This is an area where, Bobby, if your tourism sign didn't qualify on the other one, if you captured lost revenue, you'd be able to direct it to that. A street repair, you'll see that this is water. When we look at the infrastructure categories, it's water, wastewater, and telecom. Doesn't say anything about streets and roads, but street paving is a direct public governmental service. And if you capture revenue, you'd be able to use it on this. So you can use the money to provide those governmental services based on the lost revenue. And you're going to have to do calculations to do this. Joseph is prepared and KLC is prepared on our ARPA website, a calculator to help you go through the calculations here of how you would estimate your lost revenues. That's up and going, isn't it, Joseph? All right, so you go on to KLC's website and go to that ARPA page, and you can do that. But you have to compare your actual revenues at any one point in time to what you would have received but for the pandemic. And it tells you you have to do that. So you begin the analysis with the last full fiscal year prior to the public health emergency, which for city governments in Kentucky is fiscal year 2019, and then projects forward from that budget what an anticipated growth rate would be. And luckily for some of Kentucky cities, probably most Kentucky cities, it presumes a 4.1% growth rate in the budget each year, that it would go compounding 4.1% over the next 4 years from the fiscal year 2019. That's a presumption that that's what it would have grown. If you can demonstrate, looking at fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, that it was higher than 4.1%, you're able to use the higher number. But most cities will probably go to that 4.1%. It's probably going to be pretty generous for some of Kentucky cities to project a 4.1% growth rate. A lot of the cities in the coal fields are really thankful for the 4.1% assumption. So you're going to look at what your budget was times that growth rate, and allows recipients to presume that any decrease in revenue below that projected growth rate is due to COVID. You don't have to demonstrate why it's due to COVID, how COVID did the impact. If it's less, it's presumed to be as a result of COVID, even on that growth rate. Cities have to calculate their total general revenue across the entire entity. You can't just look at certain tax streams. You can't say, well, we quit renting air gazebos, so therefore let's replace it here in this gazebo. You have to look at revenues across the entire entity. And general revenue includes all revenue from taxes, any current charges, miscellaneous general revenue, which includes revenue from your facilities that are operated, like your swimming pools, recreation centers, golf courses, convention centers, auxiliary facilities, operated by third parties, even concession stands, gift shops, lease or fees from stadiums, auditoriums, convention centers, and rentals from those concessions, all included within gross revenue in terms of looking across the entire entity. It also includes intergovernmental transfers from state or other local government entities. So any road aid, municipal road aid funding would be included in that. Any base court revenue, any intergovernmental transfer that the city receives would be included in that revenue. It excludes any federal transfers, so you don't include, and this is good, I mean, you don't include any of the CARES Act funding for transferred from the federal government, but it does not include utilities. This is a point of contention for a number of our cities that in Kentucky that especially operate departments, and given the losses that a lot of our utilities incurred, it does not include any revenues from utilities. We've asked, and NLC is backing us on it, National League of Cities, to include lost revenues from utilities as part of that, or revenues from utilities as part of that calculation. So here's this formula that you got to use, which I'm glad Joseph made a simple plug and chug, I guess, application on the website, because I couldn't do this math, I don't think, myself. And then you got the fine folks at BRADD too to help you do math, and Joseph can help you. But you have to look at this formula. It's taking your base year revenue, which, as we mentioned before, is fiscal year 2019. That's your most recent budget. And you're looking at that time, your growth adjustment factor, and comparing it and subtracting out what your actual receipts are. The N and the T represent the time that's passed since you're looking at it. So that calculates in these 4 times that you're going to measure. You can immediately measure your revenue losses as of December 30th. Is that the next slide? It is. As of fiscal year 2020, as of December 30th, is it 30th or 31st, Joseph? December 30th, 2020.
December 31st.
December 31st, 2020, immediately what you've lost in terms of revenue. And of course, based on when your budget became applicable, I believe that would be 18 months, right? You'd use the T factor. So Joseph, go on the website. I think it's easier than me trying to explain the mathematical formula, but you're going to measure that 4 points in time every December 31st, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. You're going to make that measurement to see. And the formula, if you'll see, does have that compounding effect of the assumed growth rate of 4.1, or if yours is larger, that way. If you identify a shortfall based on that formula, you will have broad latitude. This is the one category where we can say you have broad latitude. I don't know how much it's going to be. We're going to probably start trying to look at some averages of what capturing lost revenue would look like. But you would have broad latitude to use that funding to support any government services up to the amount of that lost revenue you collected. And that's where transportation, other things like that comes in. The guidance does list several examples. Maintenance of infrastructure spending, including on roads and highways. Modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, protection of utility infrastructure or critical infrastructure on behalf of the city. Health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, the provision of police, fire, or other public safety services. So you can use it and capture it there to put in your budget for payroll, even if they may not qualify for mitigation of COVID on the first pot that we talked about. You may be able to capture it here to be applied to those salaries. This is one we may want to slow down a little bit and take questions on.
I have a question. So, City of Morgantown instituted a restaurant tax during COVID, which was very unpopular. But what I'm trying to get here is that our revenue increased way more than 4.1%. Restaurant tax funding accounts for 10% of our funding as of now. So I'm assuming we're going to have to include that restaurant tax funding as new funding, correct?
You would have, yes, any of those receipts, those would be considered general receipts, would be included as part of the calculation. And Jared, we've had several cities in the same boat that increase their insurance premium tax or occupational taxes, or that for the first time, which I still can't figure out why cities don't take 4% every year, for the first time in a long time, took their 4% on their property taxes. And those cities too, you're going to end up calculating in what your actual receipts are. And we've made that point to the Department of Treasury. National League of Cities supports us on this point, that you shouldn't penalize a government for acting in a way to respond to COVID by taking hard political choices, by instituting a restaurant tax or raising insurance premium tax. In some cases, some counties instituted insurance premium tax initially, that they shouldn't be penalized as a result of those revenues, rather than, and the same goes with those that draw down on their rainy day funds. That they were responsive to the needs in that area. So hopefully we'll see some change in that guidance, but it's got to be included. Joseph, I assume Morgan, whoever can tell me I'm right or wrong.
You're absolutely right. The way Treasury has interpreted this is purely how much did you collect in revenue prior to the pandemic? How much are you collecting after the pandemic or during? It does not allow you at this point. We're going to request this, but it currently does not allow you to account for any changes in tax rates or any of that. We are going to argue that Kentucky state law requires our cities to balance their budgets, so they may have to raise taxes, they may have to do other mechanisms to draw down from the rainy day funds. Both of those things are excluded from ARPA right now, so we think that our cities should be allowed to factor in those two things. As of now, that's not the case. We're certainly going to argue for that. I would also point out, JD, just to muddy the waters even more, Treasury pointed to what the Census Bureau defines as revenue from own sources. And so even though the ARPA guidance says no on utilities, technically the Census Bureau includes sewerage as revenue from own sources, not as a utility. So we don't know. We're certainly going to ask for clarification on whether sewer needs to be included in that revenue loss calculation or not.
Thank you, Joseph. It did muddy the waters for me. I did not know that one. See, they've got to do more FAQ answers. They've got to do more meat on the bones in terms of that guidance. That's why, again, I'll emphasize no rush to spend. All right, category. Any more questions on revenue replacement? Typically, that's been the one with the most robust discussion. Mary?
I think there are a few questions in the chat about, of course, yeah, it looks like Joseph is getting them, just about how those revenue replacement funds could be used for payroll.
Joseph said straight up, you can do payroll on government services, right?
So the question is, or at least as Becca said, would police qualify? And can we claim them here if we claim them on CARES? That answer, unfortunately, is no. ARPA is much, much more restrictive than the CARES Act was. The CARES Act assumed 100% of public safety was devoted to mitigating or responding to COVID-19. ARPA and the way that the Biden administration has interpreted this is that you can only claim 100% of a public safety employee's pay if they are a majority dedicated. So more than 50% of their time is spent mitigating or responding to COVID-19. However, you can claim less than that, but you would have to have some basis for, if you said 10% of our police is responding to COVID-19 or 10% of their time, you'd have to have some sort of rational basis for that. And while cities are awfully creative many times, I'm not certain there's a lot that could come up. There could be, and I hope I'm wrong in that, but that's going to be much, much more restrictive. Don't you think, JD?
I do. And I think, again, is that Becca from Auburn? Ask that question. At the very first slide, Becca, I have to give Becca a hard time. Very first slide, though, we talked about the fact that this is March 3rd, looking forward. And so you really are going to have a difficult time saying this is covered payroll. But under this exception, under this pot of money, that if you do the calculation and you capture the revenue, then you're able to use that for any governmental service. So all of that captured revenue could be used to pay public safety salary going forward or plug the hole in the budget. You just can't, under category number 1 in supporting the public health response, use it the same way you did CARES in that way. Does that make sense? Any more questions? All right, we're ready to go on. Number 5. All right, this is an area that I would just urge extreme caution on as you think about this. Remember, mindset here, one-time monies, okay? One-time monies that are we're never going to see an appropriation like this, even though it's working like grant. We're not going to see this money like manna from the sky from Congress probably ever again. So if you make salary adjustments on a go-forward basis, you need to be prepared that you're not going to have an ongoing revenue stream here to continue this. So if you're looking at this category, and it is a favored category of the Biden administration and the Department of Treasury to use this money for premium pay for essential workers. In fact, it encourages you not only to look forward, but to look backwards retroactively, pre-March 3rd. This is one of the retroactive areas. This will allow cities and counties to use the money to provide premium pay for essential workers, to their essential workers or other essential workers, or award grants to private employers for their essential workers who must be physically present at their jobs, not working remotely. And these include public health and safety staff. This would be your police and fire under this category. Your EMTs, your janitors, sanitation workers, nursing home, hospital staff, home care staff, farm food production, grocery store workers, restaurant workers, truck drivers, transit staff, warehouse workers, child care workers, educators, school personnel, social services, and human services staff, all authorized as essential workers. In addition, the guidance permits the chief executive officer of a city or county, whichever one we're talking about, to designate other classes of essential workers who were physically present on the job during the pandemic. Premium pay means up to an amount up to $13 an hour, in addition to wages or remuneration the worker would otherwise receive, not to exceed $25,000 per eligible worker not per year, over the entire term of the grant. So you could take an essential worker and go up to $13 an hour extra premium pay, had to be physically present, up to $25,000 for that over the course of the award, not to exceed that. Treasury states a preference in the guidance for prioritizing premium pay for lower income workers. And cities have to justify the need if it would raise the employee's pay greater than 150% of either the greater of the state or county average annual wage. So if you're going above 150%, you would have to provide some justification in doing that. And as this PowerPoint notes, average wages are available with state and county averages on our website, klc.org. Feel like I did a commercial there for your webpage. As I mentioned before, the guidance not only permits, but also encourages cities or recipients, cities and counties, to offer the premium pay retroactively to everything prior to March 3rd, prior to the date that you've issued it, to do retroactive pay. This is one of the times when you're looking forward. Employees who telework from a residence would not qualify for any premium pay for the time that they work from home under the guidance. Staff work for third-party contractors in eligible sectors are eligible for premium pay with additional reporting requirements. And then, as I mentioned before, the chief executive could add additional sectors so long as those sectors can be reasonably shown to be critical to protecting the health and well-being of residents. So, you may be in a situation where the city clerk is the one, Bobby, that is making a lot of those responses, or the single employee, where the chief executive officer would make that point retroactively to do that and classify you as essential, even though it's not listed. This would allow that payment. I need to go back. One of the questions we initially thought we would have is whether it would allow you to make the employer contributions retroactively to the retirement system. And even though the guidance and the law forbids contributions to pay down the unfunded liability in any retirement systems, employment payments on retirement and other features like that are authorized under the guidance. So you would be able to make benefit payments for your personnel classified as essential. Make your employer contribution to the retirement system, health insurance, other types of benefits would be authorized in addition to pay it out of that amount.
I would just add that's just for the portion that would be considered premium pay.
Yes.
That is not counting their regular pay or regular benefits associated with their regular pay.
That is an excellent clarification. Just the premium pay part. Any questions about this? Again, we're not trying to discourage you from not awarding your employees that did show up in a time of need or anything of that nature. You just need to look at this in terms of creating expectations, especially on a go forward basis, keeping in mind this is one-time money. And you got the gift of time. And the gift of time is being able to assess, be deliberative on the process in looking how you can best spend these funds.
JD, can you readdress the average salaries and how much you're allowed to go over that? I know for us, we're looking into police salaries at the moment. We're having a hard time, just like every other city, on recruiting and getting police officers. So we've been in discussion with trying to raise those salaries much more than I would say the average. We've looked at KLC's website. We're looking to pay more than those average salaries. So can you readdress that issue, please?
Yeah, if you're going to go above 150% of the greater of the state or county average annual wage with regard to whatever amount you give in premium pay, then you would have to provide particular justification. Joseph or Morgan, I know you're at the computer. and you'd be able to type up Butler County and also the state average.
Yeah, 69,000 for Butler. So we put in the chat box and on our webpage that JD's advertising, we have a list of whether your county rate would apply or whether the state rate would apply. And so I went through and looked at, as JD said, if your county rate is below what the state rate is, you can go with the state rate, go whichever one's higher. So in Butler County, that's $69,000 total. So if you're going to pay more than that, as JD said, you are allowed to, but you have to have some justification behind it. And what I've talked with some other cities is, if they're talking about their police officer pay, and this was in particular like in Northern Kentucky, where there are a number of jurisdictions right up against each other, if their competitive pay isn't, what they need to be competitive with the other cities, I think they've got a rationale behind it. So if you have any sort of rationale looking at other wages paid in your county, or specifically if you're looking at police or fire, and you can look at and say, well, the police firefighters in my area development district, for instance, are making on average higher than this state rate of pay. We have to up it to be competitive. I think that's fine. You just have to have some sort of justification.
That 69,000 is already calculating 150%, right?
Correct.
Okay. I was going to say police and fire in Butler County. If that was the average annual wage, you wouldn't be having any problem getting people.
No, we will not be paying $69,000. So I guess that answers my question.
And JD, did you address the amendment to the paying classification schedule and what your suggestion was on adding that little line at the bottom?
You've been right here the whole time, and no, I didn't. So you can do it.
Okay. So JD and I were discussing the premium pay the other day, and one of his recommendations, which I think is a good one, not just because he's my boss, is that when you do this, if it reaches a certain level, the additional monies may exceed the maximum or minimum or the pay bands that are established in your pay and classification ordinance. And his recommendation was to simply add a line to the ordinance referencing that some essential workers, whoever your legislative body ultimately determines, will receive a premium pay under the American Rescue Plan Act, blah, blah, blah. And then either sunset that provision when you think it will end, or just remember to repeal it when that stipend is no longer being applied to those essential workers. That keeps you from having to calculate that in the various pay bands and then go back and amend it when the stipend is gone.
That was a good suggestion. If you're gonna do, we've gotten a lot of questions about whether that would constitute a bonus for purposes of Section 3 of the Kentucky Constitution. And remember, I think the Treasury guidance and the language in the Act itself help support the fact that it's in consideration of work performed during the pandemic. I think it helps support the argument that it is actually in consideration of work that's been performed. If you're looking retroactively, you're going to want to use that language, that it's in consideration of the work performed during the pandemic if you do it. But instead of amending your whole pay band to comply with the 83A requirements, I think a line with a sunset is probably the best way to do that, and coming in instead of jacking up your whole pay and classification plan as a result of it. Any more questions on it? All right, number 6. I know we're over. Are we okay, Eric? Can't see Eric. I'm going to take Mary and Emily.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
There he is. Water, wastewater, and telecommunications, broadband infrastructure. This is pure. This authorizes you to invest in these areas, regardless of looking at pandemic. We've been saying, hey, to mitigate the effects of COVID, or as a result of COVID, or negative economic impacts. This infrastructure provisions are broad. And you can invest in water infrastructure projects that generally align with the Federal Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Those would include any treatment, transmission, distribution projects, including lead service line replacement. They're obsessed with this in the guidance on lead service line replacement, source rehabilitation, decontamination efforts, storage, consolidation of systems, any new systems development for drinking water would all be authorized directly, not having to show any relationship to COVID at all. The same with sewer infrastructure. If it would be authorized, generally aligning with the Federal Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which includes construction of publicly owned treatment works, non-point pollution management, national estuary program projects, decentralized water, wastewater treatment systems, stormwater is a big one, water conservation, efficiency and reuse measures, watershed pilot projects, energy efficiency measures for your publicly owned treatment works, water reuse projects, security measures at publicly owned treatment works, sewer works, and technical assistance to ensure compliance with the Clean Water Act. Those things are generally authorized and comply with the Federal Clean Water State Revolving Fund. They would be authorized here. And in addition, the state has appropriated money, and this is where, and I don't know whether Emily or any of the ad district folks want to talk about, but at the end of last session, a couple of bills passed where the state government, state legislature took some of the money that they got from their anticipated ARPA allocations and put them into water, wastewater, and broadband. And these are going to be running at the same time as you all being able to make these expenditures. You all are authorized to use these, even though you'll see non-eligible uses, is to use them as a non-federal, for any non-federal match requirements. This is the state's use of the money. We think you can use that money in coalition. So each county had an allocation, and those are going to be available through KIA, and I think the area development districts are helping with the administration of those. I don't know if y'all want to add anything on the Senate Bill 36 and those allocations.
I guess that's might be my cue. And I would apologize, I was multitasking, but we are working on, our Water Management Council has met. Some of our clerks may be aware of that. And we discussed having a special called meeting for any new projects or modifications to current projects, July the 28th. And as well, our water management planner is sending out some updates. He has been routinely, I think, as we get new information to our mayors on that listserv. So if there are any clerks that are not getting some information about KIA's pool of money, please reach out to Mary or myself or Emily, and we'll be glad to patch you through to that information, that making sure that you're getting everything that Jacob is sending out.
Thanks, Eric. Same with broadband too, coming through KIA as well, right?
We know less about broadband, but we were in a meeting with Deputy Director Sandy Williams on Friday, and I do know that they are trying to craft their guidance and get that out to everyone soon. And we'll certainly be glad to be a conduit to get that information out to the cities.
All right. So the last thing, thank you, Eric. Last thing you can spend money directly on here in terms of the category, this last category is the investment in broadband infrastructure. So again, not connected to necessarily mitigation of COVID, but you can invest in broadband infrastructure in unserved or underserved areas. If you're looking at unserved or underserved, those areas have to lack a wireline connection that reliably delivers minimum speeds of 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second upload, which is really just non-existent service. In fact, it's telling you to get it up to something which is just slightly better than non-existent service. But it encourages you recipients to prioritize projects that achieve last mile connections to households or businesses. That's a real emphasis that kind of goes along with what the state's been emphasizing with the Kentucky Connect, is doing those last mile connections. And those are the reasons that private sector hasn't served them. It's difficult. They don't have enough customers up in certain areas to provide those connections. Once you do the project, at a minimum, you should deliver 100 down, 100 up, unless it's impractical due to topography, geography, or some financial cost. But look, 100 up, 100 down is not the fastest in the world. So it's not a huge upgrade in that area. Recipients should pursue fiber optic investments. There's a preference for that, not a requirement in the guidance. Under this category, I don't know why it's a little bit confusing. They pulled this out. That's the last bullet point where I want to make that point. Cities can aid households to support internet access or digital literacy. We've seen that before with regard to the aid to household category. It's in this one again from the negative economic impacts. And then this one again, in terms of pulling it out and capturing it as a governmental service, recipients could use the funds to modernize cybersecurity, hardware, software, critical infrastructure, but only as part of the revenue replacement category that we talked about for government services up to the amount of lost revenue. So that's included in the guidance as well. No environmental NEPA review doesn't apply to the Treasury's administration of the funds. However, some projects that may be supported by other federal funds could require that. Ineligible uses, the act itself, along with the guidance, very explicitly says that you cannot use these funds to make, if you have legacy pension plans, to make contributions to shore up the unfunded liability or reduce the unfunded liability for the pension system. However, as we mentioned before, recipients could use the funds on routine payroll contributions for employees whose wages and salaries are eligible for use of the funds. You can also use that to make contributions that the employer otherwise would have to make to the retirement system. You can't use it to pay off that debt that existed pre-COVID. So you can't pay down debt service. You can't use it to pay that lawsuit off. Any of the judgments, make settlements from pesky lawsuits that came around for the city. You can't use it to pay financing expenses on new debt. It doesn't talk about payments for new debt incurred after the act. That's another, Joseph, unless we've gotten clarification there, Morgan. I don't think that's been clarified yet. It's a question that's being asked quite a bit. Or to replenish or deposit into your rainy day fund or other types of reserve funds. As we mentioned before, cities cannot use the ARPA or the LFRF funds to meet non-federal match requirements for most federal grant programs. And I do think it's important to point out that these appropriations from the General Assembly in water, sewer, and in broadband wouldn't be considered a federal grant program. Morgan, Joseph, y'all have anything to add on those ineligible uses? All right. Reporting requirements. We talked about, but for Bowling Green, they've already done it in your all's area development district. Non-entitlement communities, we already talked about that on the front end. Being able to do the budget certification, get the forms back from Billy and her team at the Department for Local Government, execute those agreements, then you'll be ready to go. All of these things, if you haven't gotten them for whatever reason from DLG, are available on the ARPA webpage. I'll advertise KLC's klc.org, and you'll see the ability to go on if you haven't received those terms and conditions agreements, the Title VI compliance requirements. Cities can decline funding. Now, I don't know why in the world you would, but we've had a couple cities, according to DLG, call and say they just didn't want the money. I think that's ridiculous. I don't usually provide that kind of commentary, but that's ridiculous. You have until December 31st, 2024 to spend the money. You're going to have some revenue losses. You're going to have something. You'll be able to come up with an expense and put that to your community, as opposed to returning it back to the state, or worse yet, returning it back to Washington, D.C. But what will happen if a community declines funding or they don't claim the funding is DLG will go back through and capture all of that and redistribute it to the participating non-entitlement cities. Reporting requirements. We're still waiting some additional guidance on this. I think it's going to be very important to see what this guidance or any forms that are developed, so that way you have at least some standard expectation of what your accountability measures are here in terms of reporting back. But financial records and supporting documents related to the award have to be retained for a 5-year period. Again, your reporting's to Treasury, not DLG, once you get the money. Includes all documents that demonstrates the awards funds were used for eligible purposes, and all reporting for both entitlement and non-entitlement, again, go to the Treasury Department. The entitlement communities is anybody from Bowling Green on? So we're just going to say this in this way. They have to do more than you all do. The counties and the entitlement communities, the metropolitan cities, have to do more reporting. Good news for you all, and you all aren't Lexington and Louisville. They have to have a plan, a recovery plan performance report that they have to do. You all, one time a year, a project and expenditure report to Treasury, October 31st each year. That first one's going to be due October 31st, 2021, and it's going to cover activity from the date that you got the award through September 30th. And you're going to have to make your first report through to Treasury on October 31st, 2021. And then a very important bullet point here, Treasury keeps saying, even in everything they've sent out so far, that they're going to continue to update this guidance and provide instructions. Hopefully we see forms and more particular information about what that entails. We do know your first Treasury report is going to have to include your number. You're getting a number from DLG that says KY and then 4 digits. Each one's going to be unique. It has to include the signed award terms and conditions agreement, the Title VI compliance assurance, and the actual budget documents that validated what you sent in the budget certification reform as your top line budget for your request for funding. Joseph has on here to remind you, treat it as a grant program. It's not true revenue sharing because of the reporting and the requirement. Cities, if you're treated as a grant recipient, you know what your responsibility is on this next slide, I think, or the next slide after this one, to continue to monitor anything you give to a subrecipient. So we'll talk about that as well, transferring that money. It's going to implicate uniform guidance apply to the program, including single audit requirements. We know if you're a recipient that receives in any 1 year $750,000 or more of federal funds, have to conduct a single audit or program audit. We just right off the bat know with this program alone, ARPA funds alone, it's going to implicate 70 cities get that amount of money in each of their tranches. So it's going to implicate some new single audit requirements. Some cities are very used to that. And keep in mind that combines with other federal awards. And last slide, you can share the money with any special purpose unit of the government, like a fire district, water district, tourism commission. They're not going to receive them directly, but you could transfer your money to those to further the goals of the act. And again, keep in mind, you got You are the one responsible when you transfer them, though. You don't transfer responsibility. You've got to ensure that the documentation and proof, you're the primary reporter to Treasury if you do transfer them to those other special units of government. You can transfer funds to county governments, your county government, but not outside your county. Counties can transfer to cities. You can collaborate with your county government and other cities within your county. You can put these funds, Bobby, I know you asked this question earlier, into an interest-bearing account. Although you don't have to open any separate bank account, cities can keep all the interest earned and use it for general fund purposes. You don't have to submit it back to Treasury, or you don't have to repurpose it back to for the goals of the act. Any interest earned off of it, the city can keep and use for general fund purposes. And then one more time, although the funds have to be obligated by December 31st, Treasury gave a much broader read and said you have until December 31st, 2026 to spend the funds. That I think anticipates the fact that we're going to have a big demand in terms of construction contracts and other things of that nature, that we may not be able to have the project completion quite by December 31st, 2024, as long as it's obligated by that date. Mentioned before, in the interim final rule, there were 38 questions that Treasury asked us in doing the rule, asking all the cities and counties in the United States for input on it. So we know that the final rule is going to look very different after the end of this 60-day comment period, which is ongoing right now. So if you have questions, get them to Joseph or Morgan. We'll try to include those. We're trying to coalesce with the other state leagues and national league, so that way we have a unified approach, but we're doing our own questions as well. And we know there's a lot of questions that haven't been addressed. Joseph said he expected the FAQ document to grow maybe 3 times as big as it is right now, maybe even more than that. And again, DLG hasn't released those final. And there's just a recap of the dates that we talked about for you all getting the money. Probably that week of July 6th or the following week from DLG is when you get the money, get your certification form and your agreements in back to DLG. Comment period closes July 16th on the 60-day rule for the final rule to be promulgated. That'll be our deadline for that. And then October 31st for you all. Your first reports will be due to Treasury, even if you haven't spent any of the money. All right, I'm going to take this off this share screen if I can figure it out. There we go. I know we went long. Eric maybe promised an hour and we went an hour and a half, but y'all have any questions?
Just a question about the stormwater usage. Could you give us a few examples of what that might include, JD?
Any kind of upgrading on your stormwater system, anything related to stormwater, as long as it's infrastructure on stormwater, I think would be included, with Joseph or Morgan to correct me if I spoke too broadly.
They're going to be the same projects that would qualify for KIA funding. So anything that meets the state plan for the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water Act. So it's pretty much an open book.
I would just add, Morgan's absolutely right, of course. I would just add that you don't necessarily have to have a utility system to do anything related to stormwater projects. I've had several cities ask me, hey, we have a city park. And while they've asked plenty of, can I upgrade my park? And that's a little more of a gray area in many ways, but a lot of times they would say, I have a park, but it floods a lot. Or I have a park, but we have some drainage issues, even if they don't have a stormwater utility specifically. So you could do things like rain gardens or detention basins or any of that sort of stuff that would qualify under the Clean Water Revolving Fund, even if you don't have a specific utility to do that. That could even potentially include rain gardens on your main street, things like that, anything that would potentially address those stormwater problems would be allowable.
You can dig that ditch, Bobby.
So anything that we probably have that is in a flooding situation probably would meet the requirement to mitigate it.
Yeah, I mean, I can, if anybody wants them, we can send you copies of the state plans under CAD. What I can tell you is it is so broad that I honestly think you might have to think of a way that it wouldn't apply in most instances. I mean, it includes planning, it includes development, pretty much anything you can think of.
I'm glad I turned the screen sharing off. I got to see Donna Blake's beautiful face. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll wrap it up there. And I thank Eric and Mary and Emily, all of you all again at BRADD for including us, and anything we can do down the road. This will be different in another month. We'll have more. There'll be more FAQ put out. There'll be more rules and stuff. It's something y'all are going to have to stay on top of over the next 3.5 years at a minimum.
Speaking of that, JD, where can we locate those FAQs?
www.klc.org. There's a link in there, Jared, for the FAQ,
Okay.
right on that ARPA page.
All right, thank you.
The FAQs, I think we got the interim final rule posted up there as well. Plus some links to National League of Cities resources maybe on there, in addition to that calculator. I think that's kind of like we did CARES Act, kind of one-stop shop for anything ARPA related. You can go on that ARPA page dedicated, and we'll keep it updated as we go along, and probably do several more of these over the course of the next 3.5 years.
JD, some people were asking for a copy of your PowerPoint, and I have made the PDF available in the chat.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I'll send out an email to everyone with the PowerPoint, and then once we get the recording up into a video that's shareable, we'll send that out to you all so you can have that too.
You got a fan in your office, Michelle? You got the hair blowing?
I do. It's a little hot in here.
Oh, you come down to my office. Well, thank you guys again, Eric.
Yeah, JD, we just want to thank KLC for partnering with us and our cities for attending. I think this will be beneficial to them to jumpstart their brains thinking about how to plan for these dollars. And as you said, I think it will be an ongoing process, and we'll be glad to host more of these sessions in the future. And Mary will do a good job of getting today's resources all kind of combined into a summary for our mayors and our clerks, so that way you'll have that in your inbox as a good reference. And we again just want to thank you all for being with us today.
Have a good one.
See you all.
See ya.